Hello, Marcelo.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us today in this very special, very strange day. It's a pleasure
Hello
and
there.
it's absolutely appropriate to be talking with you today. So thank you very much for joining us for our series of interviews in the studio. Um, so before we go about it, I do want to point out that this is a very special conversation because, as you will see, Marcelo's artistic practice touches upon a lot of the topics that we are so anxious about. The idea of being able to express our political ideas, the right to protest, the importance of human rights. So I am very, very honored to have you today, Marcelo. And I also want to point out that Marcelo is in New York right now because he just opened an exhibition at Enrique Faria Fine Art. What we see behind him are his photographs. So it's a true pleasure to be able to show one more artist that has a show at this moment. So everybody's invited to see it. Please contact the gallery to see it by appointment. Um, and how are you, Marcelo?
Very well, thank you. In a very particular day. Uh,
Absolutely.
Go to sleep very easy, but after I woke up, there's still a chance and a possibility that there is a change. Well, it is a very tense moment. We see it in the streets in New York with all the shops closed with woods and all this moment. It looks a bit like Latin America.
Yes, the United States is becoming more like Latin America by the minute. And I mean, I think there are a few lessons that they have to learn from us about populism, certainly. Uh, but I'm very happy, as I said, I know I'm repeating myself, but I see that a lot of people are showing now to have this conversation today. I think is the most appropriate talk that we could have today. And I want to thank Eugenia Enrique from Enrique Faria Fine Art for putting me in touch with you and suggesting this wonderful idea. And again, reiterate the invitation for people to see the show at the gallery. But let's start talking about your practice. I have a selection of slides
Yes.
that we prepare, and we are gonna open up. Sorry, it's gonna take me a minute to put all the images. We have so many today, which is good, and we're very glad about it. We're going to start with this series, El Fuego de las Ideas, 1968. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the series in general.
Yes,
And
the series is what I'm showing now here in the gallery, a selection. This one is from Paris. Paris is usually recognized as the center of the 68 movement, but in fact, I, that was very much affected by the ideas of the uprisings of 68 in Paris and in Mexico and all over the world, have been very much influenced by those ideas in my way of thinking, in my way of seeing the world. Again, the ideas of sexual freedom, more political participation of the young people, and a lot of freedoms in all senses that opened up in the 60s, and the 68 somehow culminated. But my work goes far beyond Paris. It includes images in London, in Asia, in Dakar, in Tucumán, in Mexico, in Brazil. This one is in Paris too, with the women in front in Saint-Paul. All the different places in the world in which the 68 movement arose. In this case, it's also a Paris picture. This was taken by the police of Paris as this one, and they were the first time in the Arles Festival a couple of years ago. And they had never been released before after the 68 correction or eruption. These are in a square in Paris, and 8 of these students are carrying cameras. So it's interesting to see that work. You can see in this widen up images of my work very many details of the photograph. So in this case, I cannot point it out very well with my finger, but there are many of the students with their pictures taking pictures of the police as the police is looking at them, which is something similar to what is happening today with the cell phones. But at that time, without cell phones, already the visual element of the social movements was already present. Today, that presence has become more significant because the images that the manifestants take during the raids or during the marches are witness and are part of the march itself. But this in some way started in the 60s.
I think it's very interesting what you're pointing out because I think that, I mean, as an artist, you are right in the verge, which a lot of artists are, of course, in between conceptualism, but also this very photographic practice from through a very artistic, resources of appropriation and this thinking about the role of the image in society. And I would love if you share a little bit with our audience how you create these images. What do you do to create any of this? I'm going to put another one just to chase the examples.
Also from the police of Paris. The process is, it starts with a research, with a visual research, with an edition of images of what I can find that represents, for instance, let's say, the uprising in Tunis. I couldn't get images, although Foucault was there during the uprising and he wrote about it. If Foucault was teaching in Tunis in 68, there are no images. But finally, I could get images of the uprising and the students in the streets in Beirut. So I got that in the American University in Beirut after a year and a half of research and could license the image and get it from the university. Sometimes I get them from photographers, sometimes from agencies, from universities, from institutions. Then I get a high res of the image, licensing the rights. All the images that I use have the rights clear, that they are not appropriations in the sense that they are not downloaded from the web or downloaded from anywhere else. The copyright, the owner of the initial image is recognized in the picture and the rights are paid for. Then I transfer this image into a black and white cotton paper. I print it in black and white, and generally I have in a size of 60 by 90, which is what I'm showing here at the back, 60 by 90. And once the picture is printed on cotton paper, the cotton has this condition that the cotton accepts crayons, aquarels, different drawing devices and elements that were traditionally used by painters. Photography historically couldn't be manipulated in such a way. There were special tints for photography, but the looks of that is completely different. In this case, I use all the tools that a painter on cotton could have, and therefore the photograph becomes the panel on which I do the work. And the work consists, after I have printed it, I do a research of what's going on there. This is Córdoba, El Cordobazo, the uprising in Argentina, May 29th, 1969. I study each case. This is in Amsterdam, the birthday of the Queen, but it was coincident with the Workers' Day. So these young students came up to the streets of Amsterdam with red flags saying 1st of May is the day of the workers and not of the kings and queens, and so on. Each picture has a long story that I research. That story, I go into books and academia and the web and institutions to know more about what is going on there. And then I write some additional texts on the picture, on the piece, and the piece then contains a visual edition, a picture edition, a print, and drawing and text that are then having also a caption underneath. You see that long text that is under the picture here in Holland. It's in Dutch. In the next one you've shown, it's in Belgrade. The text is in English. I generally use the languages that I know for, but very few people know that in Yugoslavia there were riots in '68 against Tito. But one thing leads to another, and one curator and one scholar to another, because I wanted to do a global vision of what '68 was, much beyond Paris and Mexico, although certainly Mexico was the central part in Latin America. This is a very important leader of the German uprising, Rudi Dutschke, who was shot that same year of '68. He was the leader of the students and independent students organizations. And there are videos where they are trotting in the Berlin streets, fighting against the war in Vietnam, and against some emergency laws that were voted at the time. The wall was already there, but Berlin had a whole history, a history of its own. When I show this in Germany, the connection of Germans with the social movement of '68 in Berlin is very deep. They know about it very well. Probably elsewhere, no. But the same thing happens when I show something from Australia, or show something from Uruguay or from Mexico. Different local scenes produce images that through journalists or photographers document what is going on, and those local scenes tell their story through the images in a way that is totally different to a written message. The image has multiple layers of meaning, different ways of being read, and different details that you can point out. In my reading of the work, of the picture, I can change the punctum, I can direct the attention of the viewer to what for me matters more. It's a purely subjective reading, part of a wider, let's say, narration. And here the actresses of the Rede Globo march in Rio against censorship in culture. With them, we see at the right hand Mario Pedrosa, the most important art critic of Brazilian history in the 20th century, that is marching with this Globo actresses, all women in the front. This was 52 years old. And that image is very powerful seeing today because, again, culture is affected by repression, by censorship, by lack of funding. The relationship of time and how time passes in photography is not necessarily the same relationship we have with time in everyday life. Photography can speak about what happened, and it can speak about what will happen, and there may be a connection about both. What happened is talking about today. That is, in fact, happening with this essay. When I bring up all this work of '68 around the world and the ideas it conveyed, and I try to transmit these ideas to a new generation that wouldn't pay attention to them if they didn't have images, because in fact, all this work is about language, how to narrate, how to tell, how to express an idea in which the image is essential. Text and images working together create a body of language, a visual language that connects to the viewer in a different way, in a more, let's say, poignant, emotional way.
No, and I think that there's also something very honest about somebody who works with the image, like you, an artist, a photographer, somebody who's been working with the visual media forever, a gesture of honesty in accepting the multiplicity of meanings and the necessity to convey a message, which is your message and your view of this history through the research that you do, which is also, you know, like pointing out, I mean, on the one hand, to highlight certain aspects of the image that we see, but also to clarify, you know, possible misreadings of the images, because images are absolutely powerful, but they can also be tricky, as we've seen in many cases with photojournalism. I think it's very important of your work that is accepting that, you know, possibility of multiple meanings, and accepting also the responsibility of the voice of the artist trying to convey one specific message, right?
Yes.
And I think that in that gesture, you're going beyond the gesture of just taking that image and making it your work, you know? I mean, it goes beyond.
I'm not taking the image. I had a discussion with a curator the day of the opening about the idea of appropriation. What does appropriation? It was an interesting conversation. He said, okay, is this an appropriation? And I told him my answer was a bit philosophical. And it is related with the fact that I was appropriated by these images when I was 14, 15, 16. And this appropriated my mind entirely. And I became a heir and a son or a daughter, or however you see the mixed gender today in English, whatever. I became the son of those images. I became somebody that carries those images in the mind all the time, because the ideas of '68, enjoy without limits, jouissez sans entrave, enjoy without limits. Okay, I liked that. And that became something that made me an artist. So in a way, yes, I appropriated the images, but the images appropriated of me they appropriated me, and I then appropriated them. So this is somehow related with a famous Oriental poem of a Chinese philosopher called Zhuang Tzu, which I read when I was 16, 17. At the same time, I was living through 68. And the poem says that Zhuang Tzu dreamt that he was a butterfly. When he got up, he didn't know if he was Zhuang Tzu and he was dreaming that he was a butterfly, or if he was a butterfly and he was dreaming, and she was dreaming that it was Tzu. So, okay. He was confused. Am I a butterfly dreaming that I'm a philosopher, or I am a philosopher dreaming that I'm a butterfly? But this is the kind of appropriation that I feel about this work. That is a mutual appropriation in a way. And since the rights are paid, it is a mutual appropriation in which the initial, let's say, production rights of the journalistic image I am based on are recognized and paid for, because I always believed in the importance of rights in art and in photography, because, well, I lived as a picture agency director for 30 years. So that has always...
Yeah, that's an important point. And I think that's very interesting for people to know. I mean, so Marcelo was the founder and director of Latin Stock, probably the most important image rights agency. Please correct me if I'm wrong in the way I'm describing it, in Iberoamerica, right? Is that right, Marcelo?
Yeah,
so
all over the place, where in Spanish-speaking countries all over, Mexico,
and
etc., and Brazil. Yes, we did produce and work in the distribution of images for all the media, publications, advertising, all sorts of uses. So my practice has been, professionally speaking, because, well, when I started being an artist, I didn't sell my work, of course. I do a little bit now, but at that time, I didn't at all. So I had to live off something. And photography has this acuity, this multiplicity of meanings and of possibilities, or it used to have. Now everybody's a photographer, so things are changing. Everybody's a photographer today. So what we need to do, rather than making a living out of photography, is understanding, or aside of that, is understanding what it means, the fact that visual language has become the central language for the new generation. What that does mean for a number of people under 30 that are communicating with each other with images. And what is the role of visual culture and of art in educating visually the viewers and somehow producing exchanges, emotional exchanges, that make the people understand that photography goes well beyond the selfie. And
absolutely.
It is not a mirror only, not a selfie. Okay, there is this classic discussion of mirrors and windows that was written at the founding of the MoMA Department of Photography by Sarkozy, that photography is on one hand a mirror, on the other hand a window. So somehow the mirror side of it is becoming more important, since the photographer, the video and everything on the mobile phone make the use of the phone as a mirror. But I am more interested in the image as a window, insofar it enables you to see the world and to see its fragments and to try to interpret it through the images and through the lens. And at the same time, photography for me is a central part of construction of a discourse that goes well beyond its borders. I mean, here there's a lot of conceptual elements. All the images come together into a bigger installation which can have video, sound, other elements, as I show them in different museums. The different photographs become part of a tension of places and of parallel circumstances that come together to give you a full panorama of what was happening then and how it somehow relates with what is happening now. I mean, totally. I think, yeah, it was somehow appropriated by luck. I started with this in 14, and finally I had the show in how very much this demand in Europe. It was in the Biennale de Lyon, in Palais de Beaux-Arts in Brussels, in Lisbon, in the Museo Berardo at the same time, all together, because it was the 50th anniversary of the 68. And that, for the people that, as I and many others, lived through that, through 68, and heard its influence, it was a major aspect of who we are. And that's why I believe it's still present in us, and hopefully through the transmission of experience and of practice in the new generations as well.
Absolutely. Can I ask you something? I would like you to tell a little bit about these images of Mexico in particular, because you have this photo, which also became this photo. I don't know if you want to talk about the new meanings of these images.
This image, if you leave it there for an instant, that says 43. This is the first image of the series. This is how I started with the series in 2014. You know, I have a missing brother. I was very involved, and I am very involved in human rights struggles. I'm a member of the board of the Parque de la Memoria, Memorial Park in Buenos Aires, that has names of all the victims, and an exhibition space where we've shown from Jar to Anish Kapoor, artists from all over the world, in their connection and dialogue with human rights. And when these 43 students were kidnapped in Ayotzinapa in Mexico, in the state of Guerrero, by a gang of mixture of drug cartels and military forces, and they were never seen again, I was very much impressed. So that was bringing back all the ideas of what had happened in Argentina in the 70s with the dictatorship and all this violence we went through. Although in Argentina we could judge them, because the military were judged and put into jail and lived in prison for the rest of their lives as perpetrators of the crimes. The fact that they said what happened or confessed didn't protect them from jail or from prison, because, okay, they had killed people, okay. So then we could judge them. Therefore, when I was under the impression of the kidnapping of altogether 43 high school students from a rural school in Mexico, in a very poor families from the countryside in Guerrero, I was studying in my studio with a scholar from Mexico, from the Instituto Mora, Enrique del Castillo, who is an expert in the images of Tlatelolco, which was the major event of 68 in Mexico, where 250 or 200, the name is not precise, students were massacred and shot dead in the square of the three cultures in the Tlatelolco area of the city of Mexico. Well, they were shot there and like nothing happened. I mean, nobody was judged, there was nobody in jail, there was no serious investigation. So I wrote on this picture, I asked Enrique del Castillo, who was with me, and he's a specialized researcher on the images of 68 in Mexico, on Tlatelolco, to get an image from a photographer. In this case, it's Rodrigo Moya. We asked him for the picture to work on it. He just gave it to us with no fee, because he was interested in seeing this exchange happen. For many photographers, the fact that I work on the image is an opportunity to rethink their own work and rethink how it can circulate. It's a different way of circulating. It's not in the media, it's not in a publication, it's in the art world. So I got the image and I wrote in it, if Tlatelolco would have been judged, that's what it says here, no a un nuevo Tlatelolco, not to a new Tlatelolco. If Tlatelolco would have been judged, Ayotzinapa wouldn't have happened. That connection between Tlatelolco and Ayotzinapa, between two events in Mexico, with a picture from a Mexican photographer and the experience as human rights activist of an Argentinian artist, come together in one piece. That is this one that says 43, not to a new Tlatelolco, and I explain what happened. I really believe that if Tlatelolco would have been judged this kidnapping of students 50 years later wouldn't have happened. So that started my focus on 68 and of human rights in Mexico. And I went to these images, I researched a few more. And then I started looking around in 68 and decided to stay there because I think that it was a good place to look for images and create an interpretation of those times that have so much affected my own lives and so many others. And it's not by chance that lately a lot of people and articles are talking about 1968 again, with the Black Matter movement in the streets and the social justice and racial justice issues at stake in the street.
Absolutely.
With all the streets covered by wood in New York as yesterday night. And who knows how these social movements will evolve, but they have roots. They are not invented. They are not sudden. They are part of a process of learning of generations of younger people, and many of the claims, many of the ideas that were claimed for in 1968 were achieved. This one is in Washington. This is a march.
Exactly. I wanted to close with this one because I think it's very appropriate of what's going on.
It is.
This is 1968, the Poor People's Campaign in Washington.
Yeah, that's the Poor People's Campaign. This is immediately after Martin Luther King was shot dead in Memphis in the Lorraine Hotel in Tennessee. And he had called for this movement in which he included African Americans, Latinos, Mexican Americans, poor whites, claiming for economic justice for all. This was what he was organizing when he was assassinated. Therefore, it's a very strong and important historical moment, in a way related with today. Today, recently we've also had a lot of marching in Washington, also around racial and economic justice issues. So the time passes, the images somehow change, but the issues at stake are still there, and therefore it is very interesting to review, reread, revisit these images. And the intervention helps you to do that because it acts in a way as a mediator between 50 years ago and today. Many of the texts somehow dance between the past and the present and invite you to think about it.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure, I want to go to what in a way originated this work of like the history of images and like the notes that you put, the idea of intervening a photograph, which is Buena Memoria. And I know that this is kind of like your hit from like Brodsky's greatest hits, but I think it's very important to explain it again because I see that we have a lot of like people from all over the country and the continent that are tuning in, and I think it's such an important artwork that I would love for you to tell a little bit the story about it and to share.
Of course, particularly this week and being in New York when it started to be shown at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Marcelo discovered. Yeah, Marcelo had the nice surprise to find this photo hung in the re-hanging of the Met photo collection in the Tisch Gallery. So if you go to the Met anytime soon, if you are in New York, you'll be able to see it live.
Yes, till May 21. So this is my class. If you see, there are 4 rows. In the second row in the center with a suit, that's me. To the right hand of me, it's Martin, my closest friend, who is one of the disappeared of the Argentinian dictator.
Yeah, right here.
There are 30,000 missing in Argentina. Presentes, ahora y siempre, that's how we say. They are present today and always. So 2 of these missing are from my own class. So when I came back from exile, I stayed in Madrid and Barcelona in exile for 14 years during the dictatorship and a bit later. Then I came back and I started meeting with my classmates from my class. The high school classes in the Colegio Nacional de Buenos Aires are constant, and you always have the same classmates. And well, when we met, I was just trying to regain my roots in a way. We immediately noticed the absence of the missing. I mean, what happened with Martin, what happened with Claudio. We hadn't seen each other for a long time, but the use absences, these holes in our generation, were obviously present. So, or absent, I don't know, they were the holes. So in October of '96, it was the 20th anniversary in March, it's the 20th anniversary of the coup in October of '96.
Hold on 1 second. I think I missed it.
We decided to count how many victims and to read their names for the first time. We didn't know how many there were.
Hello, hello. Give me 1 second. I don't know if anybody can tell us. You see him. I'm asking the team.
Hearing me, or there is a problem?
I'm hearing you. Yes, there seems to be a little bit of a backlog with the video. But
yeah,
okay, no, it seems to be okay.
Of little problems with this new way of working.
Yeah.
But well, I can go on now, right? So
yes, go on. So I mean, just to recap, and for anybody who just joined, I just saw that some people joined. Marcelo is explaining Laguna Memoria, which is a piece that he created in 1996 after going back when he was returning to Argentina, to Buenos Aires, to live after years of exile. He had to exile because of the political violence and the persecution of dictatorship in Argentina during the 1970s. Parts of his family were actually disappeared. And he goes back to this photo of his school class and his schoolmates, and he starts like checking what had happened with the lives of all these people, and he finds that a lot of them are absent. They had been disappeared. So sorry, yes. Go on, Marcelo.
So then I do this intervention that when we made this event to count how many victims there were in the school, we had a show of pictures that made by the families about their missing children, and with their poems and photographs and some writings of them, or music or whatever, photographs. And then I was using this picture as a backdrop for some portraits that I was making of my classmates for an essay about the pass of time and about our reunion. And then I put it in the floor and wrote on it all these information that I had gathered when we met to drink mate in my home in Buenos Aires to see each other again after 25 years. And this was like a gesture, something, a gesture. And the gesture became this writing, and it was only made to show to the then current students of the school what had happened to our generation. It didn't intend to be art at all. It didn't intend to become an art piece, although it's more now the most important art piece I've ever made. And that is interesting for me, the fact that the most important piece wasn't meant to be art when I made it. It's interesting because it proves that some things that happen internally might be more strong and more poignant than things that you think about or prepare a project about. This just happened. And that happens a lot in my artwork. Things happen like Kabbalistically, or happen as a consequence or by chance. And then this piece became the most important art piece I made. Now it's in Pinacoteca del Estado, it's in our National Museum, it's in Colombia, in El Banco de la República. It's in the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. I made 7, and they are all in some of the major museums. But they are all made again in writing. They are all originals made again. But in fact, I had a note from Ann Tucker yesterday, who is a very important curator in photography, who created the collection photography of the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. She said, why did you limit the number? More museums should have that piece. It is very interesting for us to connect with what happened in Latin America in this way. Why? Because everybody has a class picture. And therefore our holes in our, let's say, dirty war, in the state terror of the dictatorship can translate when I show it in Prague, or when I showed it in Bangladesh, or when I showed it in Paris, or in Germany, into other generations, other pictures of photographs. Today, many class pictures will have holes of the pandemic. What does that mean for that generation?
I think the beautiful thing also about this series, and that it's an international possibility of this series, as you're saying, is something that like goes beyond the frontiers of the Argentinian trauma and the awful experience that we had, is what we're seeing in this photo right now, or what we see here, which is the idea that anybody seeing this image realizes that that could have been them. You know, it makes you embody the problem
of this work, Aimé, is precisely that, because this wasn't meant to be art, was hanging. That is the first time that picture hangs in the school. It is shown in the school, not in a museum. And what happens is over those windows, the sun is coming like at noon, and all the students of the school pass through this claustro, through this major hall, and they stay in front of the image for 10, 15 minutes, connecting with our visual message of experience and with the holes we have in our class, a class that could have been theirs if they lived in that time. Therefore, there is a process of identification, as you say. This could have been me if I were there then. Therefore, it is not something distant. It becomes a history that is close to you, because you are somehow in a similar position, or you could have been had the time been different. And therefore, when you relate with something that is so closely connected to your own experience, you learn from what that is telling to you emotionally. And there is an emotional reaction, a guts feeling. And that's when the artwork works. That's what I look for with every artwork, to reach the guts feeling of the viewer. And I could achieve it with this, with many people in different contexts. So that's why I think somehow from not being art became somehow my masterpiece. But not only because of what it created, but also because it opened up a language, a way of interacting with images, intervening them, touching them, drawing them. I am not somehow respectful in terms of the classical, okay, the photograph cannot be touched, cannot be anything. No, on the contrary, I believe the photograph is a platform to create meaning, because it is so intrinsically related with our lives. Since we were born, we have had photographs. We know about ourselves and how we were when we were young through the photographs, that this very intimate relationship we have with photography is a very strong, let's say, element to build meaning around it.
Absolutely. And I mean, this photo has been, for example, the cover of books. I mean, because this idea of the school photos, you know, is such a universal concept, you know, but I want to go back, you know, to also something that you do,
let me
and something that
1 second about this image. This is my grandmother in the yellow, in the red circle. This is a picture of my grandmother in Russia. This is a part of the catalog of a show that Marianne Hirsch curated in the Hood Museum at Dartmouth University about school photos as an element of narration, an element of construction of art and of meaning, in which he researched school photos from all over the US and the world and how they work. And my class picture is there, but she chose for the cover the picture of my grandmother in Russia, which is another work I made about migration that I showed in the Museum of Imagined Sound in Sao Paulo a few years ago, Museo di Immagini du Som. And it's a work about migration, in which I identify as a migrant myself, because I was in exile, and as a grandson of migrants, because my grandmother is there still in Russia at school with her Russian language classmates, Tolstoy, Pushkin. And it wasn't until Marianne Hirsch, that was curating that show, saw that piece, that the photograph and that piece, that I realized, oh, this is a class picture as well. I hadn't even thought about that, but probably I'm just following my grandmother's path.
That's lovely. That's lovely, and what a wonderful heritage, right? Was she a linguist also?
Well, she was a teacher of Russian. In fact, she taught Russian to a very important Argentinian writer, Roberto Arlt, who used Russian of the migrants in some of his novels and stories. So she was a professor of Russian. That's the school where she became a teacher of Russian. And then she came to Argentina and exercised a bit of that, although I hadn't seen her teaching, but I saw her speaking in Russian all the time with her sister and with her friends. She didn't speak Spanish with them, only with us, the grandchildren.
That is lovely. I mean, I think there's something interesting that I do want to point out before we pass to the next project, Rezo con mis pies, which is that in these images, you're doing the same thing that I was trying to point out when you started doing, right? I mean, this is the first time in which you start doing, I mean, not only, I mean, we're talking about this idea of like writing on the image and pointing out the meaning of an image in a very sincere and direct way, taking away the presumption that an image is a statement on itself. I don't know if that's clear. I think that that's very interesting about your practice. I wonder to which degree it relates to all your experiences, like dealing with images and the meaning of truth behind it. You know, so many times when we're discussing photo theory, right, we're discussing the idea of a photograph conveying a truth, right? Like a photo being something, being an index of something that happened. And that's much more confusing, we have seen, and like theory has reviewed, but you made it clear in a much more poetic way on your images and the need to like explain what an image is saying, you know, in marking the destiny of all these people in the photograph. And I think that's something really interesting. I mean, not only of your practice on itself, but on the role of your practice in the discussions around the role of photography.
Yes, it's important, the relationship with between image and text in my work. They both work together. They create a visual language. We participate in a workshop made by Princeton University called The Itinerant Language of Photography about visual correspondences. That's another practice I had, conversation with photographs. And the discussion about the role of photography in contemporary world and in language was organized, all this symposium. It wasn't organized by an art department or by a visual department or by arts. It was the language department. How is language changing as a consequence of the impact of photography being used as a permanent tool of communication? Therefore, for me, we artists, photographers, people that have a visual culture, and that has been our lives entirely. I've been photographed by the millions and in different formats, from the agency, the photograph, the museum, and so on. It is a big responsibility to work on that, on the meaning of photography, on how it can be read. And there are many different ideas about that. For instance, Joan Fontcuberta, who is a reference on the field, he says that photography is not true. Photography is an interpretation and it can be built up. And it's never what it is, but it is a different thing. It is not reality, but an interpretation as subjective as a painting. And Fontcuberta's writings are very interesting and very challenging about the relationship between reality and photography. That certainly there is a relationship, which doesn't mean, doesn't make the photograph something truth.
Or transparent on itself.
Yeah. But the truth and art are concepts that navigate like in different rivers. They are parallel, they can get apart, come together. The relationship
Absolutely.
photography, art, and time is something that is in permanent change, and that's what makes them be interesting and a good tool to create art, because they have this ambiguity, no? This being in the middle of things and at the same time so intimate. Therefore, they have the power of photography is a strong power, especially when combined in the context of a narration, of a thesis, of a project, of a way of seeing the world. I like
absolutely.
as a tool.
Let's go to Rezo con mis pies. I want to make sure we have some time to comment on these other projects. And so this is a triptych I'm going to be showing. I can flip in between the photos of the triptych and you can explain it a little bit while I do that.
Yes, there are some works that are large panels, like triptychs or big installations I make. This installation is now up in the gallery as well. And it is part of the collection of the Jewish Museum in New York and in the Museo Moderno in Buenos Aires, one in Spanish and one in English. Sometimes I work in different languages in my work, depending on the viewers. This is an homage to a rabbi called Marshall Meyer, who was a very progressive rabbi of the Jewish community in Argentina. He's here studying with Abraham Joshua Heschel, his mentor, in the library of the Jewish Theological Seminary in 121st and Broadway in Harlem. That is the origin of the Jewish Museum. That's where the Jewish Museum New York was created. Then it was, they had a donation of a house and they came here to Fifth Avenue. But in this photograph that is in the middle of the triptych, Heschel teaches Meyer his ideas about the Bible and the street and how religion can be combined with a social practice. In the first of the pictures, this same man, this same rabbi, Abraham Joshua Heschel, is marching in Selma with Martin Luther King in the famous March of '65 in Selma. Here to the far left, we have the parliamentary member Lewis, who died a few months ago, the only living member of the 7 human rights leaders of the civic rights movements in the US. He was in that march. Then we have Reverend Ralph Abernathy, a number of people, and the rabbi in the middle. They were wearing flowers brought by the Hawaiian delegation to this march in Selma for African American rights that went from Montgomery to Selma in Alabama. So this is a famous march that went through the bridge, and the rabbi made a statement after the march saying, "When I march with Martin Luther King for African American rights, I pray with my feet." And that's the name of the piece. And all these pieces of text explain who each person is, why he or she is there. In this case, I pray with my feet. That's said by Heschel. And then Meyer learns from him, and he is sent to Argentina as to run a congregation in Belgrano, Betel. He becomes one of the most important activists and human rights leaders in Argentina during the dictatorship. And he is outspoken. He's only one of the few people that speak about it because he's American and he's a rabbi. And he's known. So he visits the government and houses and takes people out of the country and visits the prisoners. And he became the only foreign member of the National Commission of Disappeared People when the dictatorship ended. So he is an icon of human rights. And then the third image shows him in the middle of a Human Rights Act that is commemorating the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto in Buenos Aires a few months after the dictatorship is ended. Jacobo Timmerman is there, a very important journalist that wrote a book, Prisoner Without a Name, Cell Without a Number. I have the photograph across there, but no, Prisoner Without Name, Cell Without a Number, published here, of course. And then we have leaders of Mothers of Plaza de Mayo and several human rights leaders, and the story shows this Movimiento Judío por los Derechos Humanos, ni olvido ni perdón. We don't forgive, we don't pardon. That has been the strategy of the organizations in Argentina, to judge, not to forget.
Exactly.
That is what is shown in this picture. So therefore, the triptych as a whole establishes a direct link through Heschel between the civic rights movement in the US and the human rights movement in Argentina. And that's what the story of this piece is about.
It's a heartbreaking photo, and it's at the same time a very hopeful photograph. And I think it's a very important message. I like that you're bringing up a slogan that for any Argentine is it's almost like a motto. We heard it so many times, ni olvido ni perdón, not to forget, not to forgive.
Yes,
but it's nonetheless such a powerful idea, and it's an idea that is rooted also in certain, I don't think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it necessarily comes from the Jewish tradition, but the idea of forgiveness in the Jewish tradition is very severe, and it has to do also with the idea of forgiveness is like achieved through reparation and not through this idea of, it's through justice, and yeah.
It is interesting. I also had a commission to make a piece with the first piece, only the Selma March, which is standing in the collection of the Keene Center for Holocaust Studies in New Hampshire. So also the work can evolve. They wanted to talk about the Holocaust. They used only a fragment of it, although I think that this is a better representation, but they only had a small wall. So the way in which these images can work, interact with like an Holocaust center or like a museum, like the Jewish Museum in New York. When Mayer came back to New York, he founded one of the most active progressive Jewish congregations in town, which is B'nai Jeshurun in the Upper West Side. It is run by two Argentinian rabbis, his disciples. So that, in a way, continues. I could tell you much more about how it continues, because Selma was the beginning of an idea, of an ecumenic idea of working together for human rights. So the different religions would work together for human rights. And Mayer and his heirs, like Danny Goldman, other rabbis of his congregation, created a group to continue this idea and discuss the ecumenic collaboration of different religions for human rights. And one of the members of this community, the Catholic representative, was a bishop called Bergoglio, who is now the Pope. So now the Pope continues to meet with these religious leaders from Jewish and Muslim congregations. They went together to Israel to plant trees for peace. They do things in Rome. And that started in Selma with nothing less than an Argentinian Pope that came through an American rabbi. That's how things come together. And that's interesting about how art can interpolate and tell stories and history in a very much open way.
Oh, Marcelo, this is so amazing, because when we scheduled this talk, I thought it would be, an opportunity to discuss the importance of protest, and in a way to be, a call for action the day after the election, but it's also a call for hope. It's very beautiful what you're saying. A call for hope about the possibility of bringing different faiths and different ideas together in, which I think is a very important message to hear, from somebody who has lived one of the most terrible social divisions and most violent social divisions, which was, the state repression and mass murder of the Argentinian government, but also connecting with the experience of the Holocaust. So I think it's so important that you're bringing all these ideas together.
Yeah, particularly now, where we are seeing a moment, we are today, November the 4th of 2020, with all the shops closed with woods in the streets of the city.
Boarded up. Yeah, boarded up.
Nobody knows whether this will end up violently or not.
Yeah.
But there is some violence flying around, and okay, we have to deal with that. We have to deal with that.
There's fear, yeah.
We have to deal
and I think
we know that we will remember it. We know that violence is not the solution. Art and culture are looking for different ways of dealing with it, but we are in the blink. And history, through photographs and through art, tell us what that may mean and what that may bring. That's why I think it's such a good coincidence that I'm now here with this work at the 60th, the Fire of Ideas. And by chance, that is never entirely chance, it's always some way Kabbalistic in art.
Yeah.
Art is related to chance, but it's not total chance. I have the class picture hanging at the Met today. I mean, showing the consequences of violence of the state in society.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very powerful, it's very timely, and at the same time, I think that no matter what happens with this election, and hopefully there will be no violence, it also reminds, how like el fuego de las ideas, the fire of ideas continues no matter what happens politically, no matter who wins, no matter what, I mean, these images have a life in your memory as a kid, as a young man, came back to life, and you're sharing them with others to share this sense of changing the world that you had when you were young and in 1868. And also, they are now like a teaching experience. Same thing with your photograph about your classmates, Laguna Memoria, and with this image. And, we are 2 minutes away from Instagram cutting our conversation, but I wish we had had time to talk about your migrant series and all this other fantastic work. But I think this is actually the perfect ending for our conversation. Before I remind everybody again that Marcelo has this wonderful show at Enrique Faria Fine Art that you must go see. And also that he has his work hung at the Tisch Galleries at the Met Museum. So if you're in New York, please go see it. And if you're anywhere else in the Americas or in the world, please Google his work. It's fantastic, and it's a very important work to be seen today and this week. Thank you so much, Marcelo.
Thank you for this opportunity to discuss.
No, it was lovely, very emotional. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.